Welcome to the Unfettered Speech Podcast. I'm Patrick Sullivan.
And I'm Leonard Goodman. How's it going, Pat?
Going great, Len. We've got a special guest today. I'm going to let you introduce him, and
Great.
I think a lot of
Well,
our
let's
viewers will know
let's
him.
bring him on. So today's guest is comedian, activist, and award-winning journalist Jimmy Dore, host of the Jimmy Dore Show, and fellow Chicagoan. So welcome, Jimmy.
Be on with you both. Thanks for having me on, and thanks for mentioning my award. It makes me feel good.
Well, it was well earned. And one of the things there's so many topics we'd love to try to get in this 1 hour, but one of the things that you do better than anyone, in my opinion, is pull the mask off posing politicians. And I don't think there's a better example of that than Force the Vote. This was just to bring people back. This was during COVID. Millions of Americans had lost their health care provided by their jobs because they lost their jobs. Polls showed that about 2/3 of Americans, including Republicans, I think over half of Republicans, favored a national health care program like Medicare for all. And the progressive Democrats like AOC got elected promising that they were going to go to Washington, D.C., take on the power structure, take on Nancy Pelosi, and fight for health care for the people. And there was a bill that had been introduced by, I think it was Pramila Jayapal in 2017, I believe, but it had never been brought to the floor for a vote. This was a time, and I'll let Jimmy tell the story, but this was a time when the Democrats had a slim majority in the House. They needed the progressives. The progressives had real power. And I remember that Jimmy asked the progressives a very simple question. Are you posers or are you fighters? Are you Twitter warriors or are you actually going to fight for the people like you promised? Maybe should we start with that clip of AOC, Chris?
What the Bronx and Queens needs is Medicare for all, tuition-free public college, a federal jobs guarantee, and criminal justice reform. We can do it now. It doesn't take 100 years to do this. It takes political courage.
So, Jimmy, what did we learn from all of this?
So I think what I learned from Force the Vote is that not only are the politicians going to sell you out for their own careerism, for their own book deals, for their own speaking tour money, for their own place in the system, for their own celebrity, but they are going to get most of the people to go along. They got half the Democratic Party to go along with abandoning what they ran on. So what you said they all ran on. We need to get a vote for Medicare for all on the floor. They've been saying that since Nancy Pelosi came into the Congress. Nancy Pelosi herself said it in 1992 or 94, whatever year it was that she first came into Congress. And so you got it from AOC to Nancy Pelosi and everybody in the middle. 100 members of the Progressive Caucus signed on to Medicare for all. So we're like, okay, so now when it comes time to elect the speaker after the election, and they needed the squad, meaning they had like an 8-vote majority. It was very tight. And so if the squad, meaning AOC and Cori Bush, Jamal Bowman, Pramila Jayapal, Ilhan Omar, those people, if they didn't vote, if they withheld their vote from Nancy Pelosi as speaker, she couldn't become speaker. The same thing we saw the Freedom Caucus do to McCarthy, right? They extracted all these concessions from him, or else he couldn't become speaker. Right. And so but before that happened with McCarthy and the Republicans, the same exact scenario was playing out with the Democrats. Nancy Pelosi could not get elected. They didn't have enough votes unless AOC and the rest of the squad went along with it and voted for her. So it was our big idea was to get them to extract something from Nancy Pelosi for their vote. Just don't go along. Say, hey, we want something. And the thing that we decided that everybody had agreed on up until that moment, everybody had agreed on was Medicare for all. 100 people signed on to it in the Democratic Progressive Caucus. Nancy Pelosi said she was for it. AOC said we got to get in fact, when she was running, you heard that vote, that commercial. We can do this now. We don't have to wait 100 years. Well, she also said that it was a shame that we can't even get a vote for Medicare for all on the floor. Well, here was the perfect time. So we urged them to tell Nancy Pelosi, since we're in the middle of a pandemic, we want to get a vote for Medicare for all on the House floor, which is something they all ran on, something they all said they were for. It sounded like a slam dunk that we could be able to get this. And did we think that Medicare for all was going to pass? No, we did not. But what we thought, this was a great time to get a national conversation going about Medicare for all on the House floor and in the national press, because all eyes are on them, and that we would have a discussion about it in the middle of a pandemic, and then we'd have a vote for it, and then we would see who's actually for Medicare for all and who's not. So all those people who like to say I'm for it, and then they run on it, they campaign on it, and then when the time came to actually vote for it, they didn't. So this would take that away from them, and then someone who's actually pro Medicare for all could run against them. So it was a big mask off moment that they wouldn't do it. Not only would they not ask Nancy Pelosi to have a vote for Medicare for all on the House floor in exchange for their vote for her as Speaker, not only would they not do that, they wouldn't do anything. They didn't ask for it. It wasn't like, yeah, we agree that we should use the strategy of withholding our vote, just like the Republicans went on to do, and they got a lot for their vote for McCarthy as Speaker. But they didn't ask for anything, which they're even weak. It was kind of mind blowing that they would do that. They wouldn't even make a show of it to ask for anything for their vote for Nancy Pelosi. And that was the mask off moment, that no matter who you vote for, you get John McCain. And it was even true in the squad, because they voted for the Ukraine war. They're all for Russiagate. They're all for mandates for vaccines. They're all in the pocket of big pharma. They're all they're pro-war. They're anti-choice, meaning bodily autonomy. They're pro-abortion, which is the weirdest thing I've ever heard people say. But ever since COVID, they're not pro-choice anymore. They're pro-abortion. So let that sit in there. But I don't want to mix things. But forced to vote was the biggest mask off moment. It was not only that the politicians were going to turn their back on their own base, their own campaign promises, meaning the most progressive people in Congress. And Bernie Sanders was famously silent during the whole forced to vote. He never weighed in on it. The guy whose number one issue is Medicare for all didn't have anything to say about it. Noam Chomsky was asked about it in an interview about forced to vote. And not only did he not support it, but he parroted the exact talking points that came from the healthcare industry and the establishment and the oligarchs. He said that the activists, the people like me who were advocating for a vote for Medicare for all during a pandemic, were like children who wanted candy. That is verbatim what Hillary Clinton referred to people advocating for Medicare for all was. So
Well, it's pretty clear, Jimmy, at that time. I remember when that was happening, and it was absolutely right. I mean, we've seen this other times, other places where the amen corner of the media is saying the exact same words, the exact same thing at the exact same time. So people like Cenk Uygur and other people were saying, well, Jimmy, this isn't the right time for that. Do you
right.
remember the exact phrase that everyone was saying, like, Jimmy doesn't understand that this isn't the right time to raise this issue, right? Wasn't that the words that they were always saying? Not the
Yeah.
right time. They want to do it, just not now.
Well, they said three things. They said it's not the time. They said there was no strategy behind it. What's your strategy? As if I wasn't presenting a strategy. The whole strategy was that you use your votes to withhold your vote to get her to agree to a concession. That's the strategy. What are you talking about? And then the third thing was that it'll set the movement back for Medicare for all. If we actually pushed,
Right.
so I don't know, can you point to a time in history when pushing for something actually pushed it backwards? I can't think.
No.
I can't.
No.
So, and here we are 5 years later, and
Right.
are we any closer to Medicare for all? They've never even talked about it. They didn't bring it up once during Joe Biden's administration. Not only did they not bring up Medicare for all, and Bernie Sanders went completely silent, and his big push against the oligarchs was also silent magically during those 4 years. Not only did they not. No, I know I lost my point. Oh gosh, darn it.
But
But go ahead.
that argument that it's not the right time, we can't win it, to me, that's a total fraud, because if there was ever a time when you had some momentum
That
for
was
Medicare
the
for all.
time.
It was during COVID because people are like, yeah, I want my neighbor to be able to go to the doctor if he's sick without worrying about bankrupting his family. He's driving, people that are driving my Uber and bringing me my groceries. I don't want them to be running around sick. And, I think really the problem is that they were afraid that I don't know whether they were afraid that it actually could pass during COVID because there was. The polls were showing more than half of Republicans and like 85% of Democrats were in favor of a national health care program. So I think the real fear was that if it was brought to the floor and people like AOC actually brought their minions out to put pressure on Congress, that they were going to have to decide, are they going to answer to their donors or are they going to answer to their voters? And that was a position that they didn't want to be in. So I think the problem was that they thought they might be forced to actually pass it, and then what are their donors going to do? They're going to turn the Republican Party.
Well, I don't think they would. That's interesting. I have a different theory. I think they were afraid that they would be exposed as actually not supporting Medicare for all, because then because they wouldn't vote for it, even though they
Yeah,
have the
right.
majority in Congress. They wouldn't have done it. They would have found, how they find just enough Democrats to pass a
Sure,
horrible bill, or just enough. Yeah. So
sure.
that's exactly what they would have done. They would have found just enough Democrats to not vote for it. But that point wasn't to get it to pass. Even though you're right, it had momentum, and that depending on how you ask the question about Medicare for all, you would get upwards of 70% of people who are self-identified conservatives on board, depending on how you ask the
Right.
question. So yeah, so they didn't want to. They knew that there would be overwhelming public pressure to do this. If there was a public debate on the floor of the Congress about it, if there was a vote about it, if corporate media covered it, yes, they knew that they're on the wrong side of the issue. And so that's why they didn't want to bring the issue up. And they didn't. They didn't bring up the issue. And so that was a big mask off moment. And that's when I knew that AOC and Bernie Sanders and anybody else who claims they're a progressive in the Democratic Party is just there to sheep herd you back into the two-party duopoly, the same bird with two right wings, as they say, and and to keep you fighting each other instead of joining together and fighting the oligarchy and the establishment. And that's exactly what Bernie Sanders is there for, and that's exactly what AOC is there for. It's to take the revolutionary energy that actually exists in the country and funnel it back into the system, and where it will die. As Jama Sawant famously said, or I don't know if I heard her say once, that the road for progressives inside the Democratic Party leads to a graveyard. And that's been proven over and over and over again. Joe Biden, not only did they not push Medicare for all for 4 years, Joe Biden ran on a public option. His,
Right.
his big dodge of Medicare for all was, I'm going to give people the option to buy into
Yeah.
Medicare for all, which is what Barack Obama had promised 15 years earlier about, is that he's not going to sign a health care bill, Obamacare, unless it includes a public option. Of course,
Right.
he did that very thing he said he wouldn't do. And so here we are, I don't know, 15 years later, and there is Joe Biden running on the same thing. I'm going to give you a public option. He gets elected, never brings it up.
Never brought it up. Or a $15 minimum wage.
That's right.
What happened? Yeah.
The two big things he ran
Yeah.
on was Medicare, a public option, and $15 minimum wage. And not only did Joe Biden not bring it up, but neither did AOC, neither did Bernie Sanders, neither did Elizabeth Warren. They're all there because those people are there to sheep herd you back into an anti-worker, pro-Wall Street, pro-war party, which is the Democratic Party. They're not a left party. I have to people they get this idea that there's a left and a right in America. There is not a left in America, organized anyway. The left party, the Democratic Party, is a right-wing authoritarian party which serves Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, and big pharma. That's what they're there for.
And how do you think the press works into all that? Getting back to that, when you were up against a lot of people who were telling you the exact same words, the exact same phrases, that why having a strategy meant that actually we had no strategy. Where it's the same thing that happened like in Ukraine, where they say this provoked war is unprovoked, and they keep saying it's unprovoked. So what do you think is going on with not even just, we know about the ABCs and MSNBCs of the world, but even the independent, like the Young Turks, they were all singing from the same playbook. How do you think that happens?
Oh, I can tell you my theory on the Young Turks is that they took $20 million from a top Democratic donor, Jeffrey Katzenberg. They have a corporate board. They are a corporate news show, and they answer to a corporate board of hedge fund investors. So I think that's what happened with them is that they were looking for more donors. They were looking for bigger donors, and they'll always going to they do that thing where they pretend they're against the corporate Democrats, and and then when times comes, they're always going to tell you to vote for the Democrat. They're never going to tell you to try to step outside the system, vote third party or organize third party, or even they wouldn't even get on board with people who are organizing for Medicare for all. They wouldn't do it, and so. And the rest of them, uh, they either have MSNBC contracts or they're looking for money from the establishment, and it's just much easier to go along with the establishment than it is to actually fight them. And so there's only a handful of people that actually fight them. It's the difference between Michael Parenti and Noam Chomsky. It's a big difference, and so uh, it's led me to be. I hate to say it, but I'm. That experience made me very pessimistic because I saw the full force of the corporate media. I saw the full force of people who consider themselves activists that just lied. People like Ryan Grimm, who's at Drop Site News and who's at the Breaking Points. They just lied during Force the Vote. They lied. They sided and they protected politicians and they protected the establishment and they tried to discredit healthcare activists. And it worked because there was no price to pay for AOC to do that. There was no price to pay for Ryan Grimm, and at the time it was The Intercept, and those people now they're drop site. There was no price for them to pay for doing that. There never is. When you lie at the behest of the establishment, you get rewarded. When you tell the truth that is inconvenient to the establishment, you get punished. So just like Tucker Carlson, when he started telling the truth about the Ukraine war, the Syrian war, and the big pharma during COVID, that's when he got fired. Not when he was lying about the wars, not when he was urging on America to go into more foreign adventures. No, it's when he started to tell the truth about it. Rachel Maddow lied about Russiagate at the top of her lungs for 4 straight years, pushing an FBI conspiracy theory to undermine an elected president, and she got a $35 million contract, whereas Tucker Carlson got he got fired. So that's how this works. I got to see that during that, and so now I'm very. I don't. It has to come up. I think it has to be a bottom up movement for us to take back our country and our government, and that usually comes from labor. And I haven't heard anything from labor since Christian Smalls organized that Amazon, the first Amazon warehouse to get or distribution center was on Staten Island. He organized with a bunch of Trump voters against Jeff Bezos, and that's the template for how this has to work. Everybody left and right have to realize that we're being played because we are being played, and that we share a common enemy, and that common enemy is Jeff Bezos and the WEF billionaire class at Davos that actually run things and run our government, because the people who we elect don't actually run the government. So when I would tell people, this is one of my favorite things. I go, the establishment, the ruling class, they all conspired together to screw workers and everybody else. And they go, oh, really, Jimmy? Do they have secret meetings? Well, now we know they do. They have built the Bilderberg.
Yeah.
But I would tell them, no, that they have. It's called a session of Congress. What do you think
Yeah.
when there's a session of Congress, they're in there doing the bidding of workers and students and the elderly and the sick? They're in there doing the bidding of the donor class, the billionaires that actually fund both parties. When Bill Clinton and Al Gore got in bed with Wall Street, and it was called the DLC, the Democratic Leadership Council, they had Koch brother people on their so that was because Ronald Reagan had wiped out the Democratic Party so hard that they thought, well, if you can't beat them, join them. So if they're going to take Wall Street money, we're going to take Wall Street money. And that was the end for the Democratic Party. That's when Bill Clinton went on to pass NAFTA, which cut the legs out from underneath workers and for a couple generations now. That's when he went on to he gutted welfare at the same time. He ramped up the prison industrial complex. He put 100,000 more cops on the street. He deregulated Wall Street, which led to a collapse of the economic system in America within 10 years. And who got hurt the worst by that? Working class people and poor black and brown people. And so, he was going to try to privatize Social Security at the same time, but luckily Monica Lewinsky came along and that derailed his plans. So, yeah, I don't know what the question was, but the answer is I'm very pessimistic because people still get caught up in this left right paradigm, which I've been trying to wake them up to. They all have, the donor class, the billionaires, the Peter Thiels, the Zoroses, the Bill Gates, the Jeff Bezos. They all work together behind the scenes. They all have the same common interests, right? They all want a surveillance state. They all want us living in 15-minute cities, driving electric scooters, eating bugs that hit us on the face as we drive around town. This idea that there's a left and a right. Why is there only a left and a right? Why aren't there 4 parties, 5 parties? Why isn't there 8 parties? And it's like there are in some parts of Europe. It's because it's easier to divide and control. It's the oldest game in the world, and we're living in it. And this is the result of it.
Well, I think also they, to your point, they failed on Medicare for all when you were pushing them to do that. And since then, what do they do? What do they go back to their voters with? It's always going back saying, if you don't elect me, the other side's going to do horrible things. If you don't elect me, it's going to be even worse. They don't have anything positive to offer. There's nothing that's like, hey, if you give me your vote, I'm going to give you this thing. It's always, the other side is a fascist. The other side is a monster of some kind that's going to destroy democracy or whatever. So, and same on the Republican side, where they're communists or whatever.
Yes.
Just
Yes.
up the rhetoric and up the dopamine, but there's no quid pro quo to vote. Like, what do you get? Like, you're just voting to keep Armageddon from happening every single time. How many elections were the most consequential election of our lifetime that we've lived through? Every single one of them.
Every single one. It's the most important one, and you have to vote against something. It's not
something.
It's fear.
So I thought I was voting for something when I voted for Barack Obama, but of course, what I voted for was John McCain with black skin. That's exactly, we got the exact same policies had it been Barack Obama or John McCain. In fact, did you know that Barack Obama got more money from Wall Street than John McCain did, and that his entire cabinet came from an email that came from Citigroup? And the reason, and every one of those people that Citigroup wanted in his cabinet, Barack Obama, ended up in his cabinet. And the reason I know that was because Julian Assange revealed that through WikiLeaks, and that's why they wanted to imprison him and eventually tried to kill him, and they made him plead guilty to doing journalism, was because he exposed their whole game. So voting for Barack Obama, I thought I was voting for something. What I was voting for was my oppressor, because he took us from 2 wars to 7. He kicked 5.1 million families out of their homes while he made sure the bankers didn't miss their bonuses. He gave us a healthcare plan that came directly out of the Heritage Foundation, which is the people who gave us the 2025 plan that everybody was scared about last election. So these conservative think tanks, he's implementing their policies and lying to us to get us to vote for him. I'm going to get you the public option. He never did that. And he never stood up with workers, and he wouldn't even stand up with people protesting at DAPL. I'm going to let it play out. He wouldn't even prosecute the people who committed a torture program worldwide. He said all those crimes happened in the past, and he was looking towards the future. And so, they always, so now they don't even pretend to give you something to vote for. They just want you to vote against Donald Trump, which is why Donald Trump was the greatest gift to the Democratic Party. He was their greatest fundraiser. So when, I don't mean to talk too much, but when I went to the Democratic convention in 2016, it was in Philadelphia. When you walked into the room, half of the convention hall was progressives, people who wanted to overturn the status quo and the corporate stranglehold on the Democratic Party. And there was real friction and tension inside that convention hall. skip for, and I thought that's why I thought, well, in the next convention, we're going to take over. I really thought that. That's how stupid I was. I really thought that was going to happen. But what actually happened was they cheated Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, instead of then using his power, because Hillary Clinton couldn't get elected without his half of the Democratic Party voting for her, he should have extracted something from her, like, hey, we're going to get corporate money out of the DNC, or hey, anything. He asked for nothing. He told the people he had just led for an entire election cycle to vote for their oppressors and ask for nothing, and go right back into the corporate Democratic pro-war anti-worker party. And so then when 2024 came around, because 2020 we didn't have a convention, 2024 I went to the convention in Chicago. It was like a Stepford Wives convention. You walk in there, they were all in lockstep. They were all pro-billionaire. They were all pro-war. They were all pro-corporate, and they didn't have a problem with it that they didn't even have a primary. Like, that's how bad it went. They had a primary in 2016, and they're like, we can't do this again. We can't let people decide, which is why they have super delegates. So the Democrats have super delegates to make sure someone like Bernie Sanders could never become president or the nominee. And so you're never going to have that. So we're not going to be able to vote our way out of this.
You know, my politics are very similar to yours, Jimmy. I don't know if it's because we're both from Chicago, but I'm against war. I'm for free speech, but I also believe in public parks, public schools,
Right.
public health care, and and I was the same with Barack Obama. I was out in Grant Park celebrating, and but within 1 year of his election, I had a come to Jesus moment and saw that this was not what he pretended to be. At that time, I was representing someone at Guantanamo Bay. He promised to close it. He bailed out the banks, as you've gone over in your show so many times. But I want to ask you, another reason why I listen to your show is you remind me how much I need to hate and fear the mainstream media. And one example story that you've covered, I'd like to talk about a little bit, is the Charlie Kirk assassination. This was something that happened in front of our eyes, a public assassination of incredibly popular, influential young man. And after maybe a day or two of fumbling, the mainstream media all agreed on a suspect or the culprit, and this was I think, 22-year-old Tyler Robinson. And the explanation was he was upset because Charlie Kirk had said bad things about trans people or something like that. And we're all supposed to go along with it. But thanks to shows like yours and some others, pretty soon millions of Americans came to see that this was almost certainly not, he was almost certainly not the killer. And the story didn't make sense, all the holes in it that you've reported. How are you seeing this story now? Because in one sense, okay, it shows that people are no longer trusting the mainstream media. That's a good thing. And we see, if you turn on MSNBC or all these shows, they're all, every other commercial is big pharma. There's no way you could, like during COVID, I think we all sort of realized, okay, this is not where I'm going to get trustworthy news. So that's a good thing. But then on the other hand, there's this feeling that we're never going to learn the truth, because the people that have the power, the establishment, the people in power that have the power to run grand juries and to subpoena documents and to do real investigations, are all on the take, and we can't trust them. So it's kind of a sad feeling in a way, because are we ever going to learn what actually happened? Is the truth ever going to come to light? I could ask the exact same questions about Epstein and that whole racket. How are you feeling about this, and how are you seeing these types of stories?
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable how they don't care how they discredit themselves, like Kash Patel, Dan Bongino, Trump himself saying Epstein is a hoax. Um, And now we see, of course, it's anything but. All the same people who were screaming about it now just flip as soon as they get power. And yeah, the establishment news right now is out there pushing that Epstein was somehow working with Russia, not working with Israel. It's hilarious how you're right, you can't hate the mainstream news enough, right? Because they're not there. The one good thing that Chomsky told us was that they're not there to give you the news, they're there to manufacture consent. It's interesting how he left out the Israel lobby in that book, by the way. It's anyway, it was all just corporate influence. But yeah, so you can't hate the corporate news enough, and thank God, you know, people. We do have alternative sources now, which we never did before, which makes it a lot harder. Which is why you see them have to push it down even further, like the propaganda they have to push, they have to discredit. Look what they did to Joe Rogan during COVID, and now everybody knows. Well, now you and I know, and anybody who knows anything knows he was telling the truth the whole time. And so that whenever they come after you, and what I've noticed is whenever you're not allowed to ask a question about something, then that's the question you should be asking. And I learned it early on with Seth Rich that they it was toxic. They make it toxic to go to ask any questions about anything. They did the same thing with RussiaGate. If I asked a question, I was a Putin puppet. Same thing they did with COVID and the Ukraine war. If you went against COVID, you were an anti-science flat earther, and which was the exact opposite. They're the ones who weren't following science, which is the irony of it all. But no, the thing that I've come to realize is that in order to so whoever really killed Charlie Kirk, we might find out who it is. We might figure it out, but they'll never be prosecuted, just like they didn't prosecute the people who did the torture program. They'll never, because they're doing these things at the behest of the establishment. And you need someone inside the establishment to actually prosecute these people. Well, right now, the establishment does not want to prosecute the Charlie. They don't even want to know who actually did the Charlie Kirk thing. And what they're going to do is try to discredit and make it toxic to ask any questions, which they've done. And so you see how horrible the mainstream news is once again. They haven't asked one question about the Charlie Kirk assassination. And we all know there's no way this 22-year-old straight A student who didn't have a history of anything criminal whatsoever, never been to that campus, somehow got up that stairwell. He knew it was open. Even though there's a security team that's supposed to, they said they walked this, they didn't do anything. There was no drone coverage, although they said there was. So they contradicted each other. And he got up on top of a roof, which I guess nobody in his $1 million security team, nobody in the campus police, nobody in the local police, nobody was watching the roofs, apparently, because he was able to get up there, take a gun out of his backpack, even though it wasn't in his backpack because it wouldn't fit. And they said he had it stuffed down his pants, even though he didn't, because how would he walk up the stair? So somehow he got this gun, and then he had to assemble it. He had to assemble it. Not only did he get on the roof where everybody could see, he had to then assemble it. Nobody saw him assembling it. Nobody saw him put the scope on. Nobody saw him take the shot. Nobody saw him disassemble the gun. Nobody saw him take. It was unbelievable, that story. And so they don't care. But even though nobody believes that story, and they're trying as hard as they can with the Mockingbird Press 2.0, is what Candace Owens calls it, to try to push that narrative and discredit anybody asking obvious questions. Even if we come to a conclusion that we know who did it, they're not going to, you need someone inside government with power to prosecute them.
Right.
It's never going to happen. Just like they didn't prosecute torturers, just like they're not going to prosecute anybody in Charlie Kirk. They didn't prosecute Fauci, nobody for lying during COVID. There's no lies ever. Even we know the Iraq war was a complete lie. No prosecutions, no nothing, but they will prosecute Donald Trump for selling a building at more money than they thought it was worth. It's nuts to me. And now Donald Trump is doing the same thing. Now he's part of the deep state, which is why he was allowed to become president. He was allowed to become president because they got him, and he's doing their bidding at every turn. He's still funding the Ukraine war. He's bombing Yemen. He's bombing Iran. He's overthrowing Venezuela. He's still sanctioning Russia. He's doing everything they want. The deep state. He's not fighting them at any turn. He's exploding the Pentagon budget. He wouldn't do a Doge style accounting of the Pentagon, which is what everybody wanted. So they're not doing it again. It's Donald Trump has been completely compromised.
So how do you think that ends? I think Leonard and I were talking about this, before you came on. How does that end when a lot of people are watching you. A lot of people are watching people like you who are exposing these kinds of things. So when they've already seen that happen in the past with the Iraq War, with torture. The only person who was prosecuted for torture was the guy who exposed it, John Kiraku. They see this over and over again. But if they see that, they know this, Charlie Kirk's audience knows that that kind of gun doesn't create that kind of wound. I don't know that, but that's what everyone says. So they see no justice occurring there. And then they'll see no justice with Epstein. And then they'll see no justice with the next thing that comes along. What happens then? Is it like Chicago in the 70s? We're all Chicago people. Was it like when you knew how corrupt it was, but people would go, well, that's the way it is here. Or does something break? Like with all of that awful corruption right in front of your face, like how do you think it all ends?
So it just seems whenever there's again enough revolutionary energy, they find a way to funnel it back into that. Like people thought they had it with Bernie Sanders. I thought it was just a matter of time before we took over the Democratic Party and we had a real party that represented people again instead of corporations and billionaires. I was 100% wrong. And then so there was enough around COVID and Ukraine and all that and to elect Donald Trump and free speech. So people came together for free speech. They thought they were electing and of course, they put it on Donald Trump, who funneled it right back into the deep state two-party duopoly, and he's the one ramping up their surveillance state, which is the antithesis of what his base normally says they want. And so he's the perfect one to do it. Barack Obama was the perfect one to bail out the banks because he silenced the natural critics on the left because he was doing it. Just like Donald Trump silenced the natural critics on the right when he ramps up the surveillance state and expands the war machine. How do we, people ask me when I do live shows, I do stand-up shows, and people, I just did the Comedy Store last Friday, and people were screaming out of the audience, what do we do? What do we do? And the only thing I can say is that the last time the government was this unresponsive to the people, George Washington picked up a gun and started shooting people. Now, I'm not saying that that's what we should do. I'm just saying that's what happened the last time it was this bad. And so I don't really know what we could do to get ourselves out of this. Like I said, usually it comes from labor, but we haven't seen another big labor push since Christian Smalls did that on Staten Island. Christian Small's not even associated with that union anymore. So there's nobody out there trying to organize labor anymore. Why isn't why isn't Walmart organized? Why don't they do that? Why don't they? So I just don't understand why there isn't. So they're starting to organize Starbucks, and then they close them down. But they can't do that forever. So we all know that it has to come from labor somehow. But they've managed to infiltrate. They're great. They know how to infiltrate and divide. It's in their playbook.
Labor was, what was it, 70 or 80% of American workers belonged to a union some 30,
And
30, 40 years ago. Today, it's, I don't even know,
less than 10.
20%, less than 10.
Less than
So,
10.
and speaking of labor, just sort of to add on to what Pat was saying, about Bernie and, they had the same hopes in Britain with Jeremy Corbyn. I remember that. He was predicted to win. He was in the lead he was leading the Labour Party. He was going to be prime minister, and then they stabbed him in the back with phony charges of anti-Semitism. I mean, we've seen these playbooks again and again and again, and it kind of comes back to Pat's question. I mean, we can't vote our way out of it. We're powerless. And more wealth is going to these psychopaths, Zionists, that are running our media, running our government, controlling Trump. And even back to the Epstein files, we're getting little drips of embarrassing information about public figures. Yeah, maybe that will satisfy people for some time. But the one thing that we're not going to get is his relationship with intelligence.
Correct.
And that is really the key, because, if the truth comes out, and, there are videotapes, he videotaped everything. So there's a stash of videotapes of important people in compromising positions, or maybe worse than compromising positions, maybe torture, maybe murders of vulnerable underage people. We're not going to get that information, and if people could see that, that would have been worse than anything the church committee exposed.
Right.
If
Yeah.
we see if the CIA is actually in bed with a child sex predator, for
Well,
what? To get compromat on some public figures so we can force them to go along with our wars? I don't. I feel like that would be grounds for people to get out in the streets and revolt.
well,
So, well, one of the things you did, Jimmy, and I wonder how it's going now. Speaking of revolts, you were involved for a while with the People's Party, and starting to think about a third party. How's your view on that now? Or has your view changed at all since you were trying to get that off the ground?
um, it's it's I'm less enthusiastic. I think we have to have a third party that actually represents workers and doesn't take corporate money. But what I saw with the Green Party during COVID is that they're completely infiltrated by the intelligence community. So that party's gone. I mean, there might be good people on the ground that have their hearts in the right place, but the people running they turned it into an LGBTQ organization that dabbles in environmentalism. That's what happened with the Green Party. And if you look at the Green Party in Europe, they're the most pro-war party there is. So that's the problem with parties is that the establishment, they know how to expertly infiltrate them and then divide and conquer. It's in their playbook, in the CIA's playbook. They did that with the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America. They're a completely compromised organization by the intelligence community. And so just like the Green Party is, just like the Democrats and the Republican, we're run by the deep state, which in the deep state they don't serve they don't serve the president. Well, I always like to give this example. Right after Trump was elected in 2016, Chuck Schumer went on Rachel Maddow, and Donald Trump he was insulting the deep state. First of all, he was using the term deep state, and he was saying how they're the ones who are warmongers and how they lie to the people. And so Chuck Schumer went on Rachel Maddow, and he said, well, for the guy who thinks he's smart, he's being really dumb to criticize the intelligence community because they have 6 ways to Sunday to get back at you. And so he was the leading Democrat in the country at that time. And what that tells people, and I often talk about this on my show, what he did, he unwittingly revealed at that moment that the FBI and the CIA and the NSA don't actually work for the president.
No.
That the president has to be afraid of them, and he can't get on their bad side, or else they're gonna get they dictate to him. So if they don't work for the president, my question is, who do they work for? And that's the question that Rachel Maddow should have asked. Of course, she's not going to because she works for them too.
Jimmy, you mentioned people getting infiltrated and compromised. We see that even in the independent media because
Yes.
there's and this is something I don't understand. Maybe you have more insight into this. It's almost like, and you see people that they do some good work. You mentioned some of them, like Drop Site and Breaking Points. They do some good work, but then it seems like there's like this need to be in with the right crowd, or whether they want to go to the right parties, or whether it's just access journalism. I mean, we saw the value of access journalism during the Iraq War. The people that were the closest to the Bush administration got it the worst. They had the worst information. They knew exactly how many tons of botulinum toxin Saddam had. It was all bullshit. Those are the people that had the access journalism. But it's the people from the outside that actually got it right. So access journalism is complete bullshit. It's meaningless. It's just stenography. It's putting putting a microphone to the mouth of power. So how do you avoid that in independent media? I mean, I don't know. So people like Max Blumenthal, I've asked him that question as well. He's right in Washington, D.C., in the belly of the beast. But somehow he's able to avoid those temptations of wanting to be part of that in crowd and rubbing shoulders with those people. You're in L.A. How do you avoid getting sucked into these worlds of propaganda and corruption and um, disinformation, I guess we could say.
I mean, I think it's because I really don't know, but I think it's because I grew up blue collar in Chicago. I saw how political machines work firsthand. I saw how they divide and conquer. And plus, I came from comedy, and one of my heroes was George Carlin. And George Carlin's jumping off point was, I always assume the government is lying. And so I kind of have that built into my DNA, hardwired into my, lizard brain, that the government is lying, and where are they lying, and how do I resist? I mean, like I said, I'm not a great person. I'm just a regular C student, nightclub comedian, and the fact that I could see through the propaganda meant that if I know that they're lying, they know they're lying, and I'm going to point it out. How do I? Nobody's made an offer. Nobody's made an offer to get me to compromise myself. That hasn't happened. So when it happens, I'll let you know. But it hasn't happened. I've been
But not only is George Carlin's rule the rule of comedy, which you're an expert at, but it's also the rule of journalism. Don't trust governments. Governments lie. You know, and somehow that rule seems to have been lost on 90% of the press. So
Well, it's funny, you just real quick, Fredo Cuomo, as I call him, Chris Cuomo, he was famously, him and Don Lemon would beat up on Joe Rogan, and him advocating for ivermectin, and they would say how criminal that was and how unethical it was for him to do that, and how this stupid audience goes along with him, and they're taking this horse dewormer, and now, and all it would have taken for them to do was to do a 5-second Google search on
right.
ivermectin, and they would find out that it was a Nobel Prize winning human medicine that's on the WHO list of essential medicines. And now that Chris Cuomo got vaccine injured, his doctor put him on ivermectin. And now he's out there saying, well, I didn't know any better because I was being lied to by the establishment. Yeah, I know. That's why you're supposed to look. That's why you're a journalist. Your jumping off point is that Fauci's lying, the FDA's lying, the government, the White House is lying. And then you're supposed to debunk them. You're not supposed to just repeat them. And then when it comes out that they lied, you go, oh, well, I didn't know. That's what the government told me. So that's why these people on TV are not journalists. These people on TV are there to manufacture consent. And it's like, one time I was at somehow I got invited to a media symposium, and I was on a panel with a guy who was an Emmy award winning producer for NBC News. And he said that, I told him, I said, you all think alike. That's why you've been groomed from the time you were in kindergarten to be in those meetings, those editorial meetings in corporate media, but you don't know it. You colored inside the lines. You're the one. So you got pushed through the system. You're the ones they love. I always colored outside the lines, which is why I'll never be invited into those editorial meetings in corporate media, because he said, I don't know what you think happens in those meetings. I go, well, I don't know, because I'll never be invited, but I do know you always agree with each other that we need another war. Isn't that weird? Every news outlet always agrees on the next war. It's really weird. So I don't know how I got off on that, but there we are.
Well, if we have a few minutes left, that you sort of brought up another point that's something unusual about some of the best people in independent media is that you may not be you have a good bullshit detector, and then you may not be 100% correct all the time, but you are not afraid to admit when you make a mistake. Like COVID is a great one, Jimmy, because you've told your own personal story of COVID, that you bought into it, and then something happened to you, and you uh, strove to find the truth, and you had on people like Robert Malone and brought in voices that no one could hear in the mainstream media because they were locked out. And these were some of the most important voices, some of the best scientists, people that had the best information, that were actually successfully treating people with COVID, that predicted exactly where it was all going to go. And these voices were shut out. So, maybe you could just say a word about that, your willingness to sort of examine your own how propaganda worked with you in COVID.
Well, it certainly worked with me. At first, I bought into this virus is the most deadly thing in the world, and that if you have a pre-existing condition, it's going to kill you, and you need to get this vaccine. I thought it was a vaccine, and it's not. And so then I was one of the first people to get it, right? Um, and so I got injured. I got vaccine injured, and as soon as I found a doctor that would treat me, the doctor gave me ivermectin, and that's when I was like, wait, I thought this was poison. And then he explained to me that no, why they have to discredit ivermectin is because it actually works. And if there's a drug that treats COVID, they would, according to the law, you couldn't get an emergency use
That's
authorization for
right.
the vaccine. So that's why they had to downplay hydroxychloroquine. They had to not only downplay it, they had to discredit it and smear it. Ivermectin, even steroids. They wouldn't allow you to prescribe steroids. And then, so when I looked into it, I realized they were lying about everything. They were lying about the vaccine stopping transmission and contraction. They knew they were lying. They were lying about the virus, where it was originated from. They were lying about funding the creation of the virus. They were lying about natural immunity. They were lying about herd immunity. They were lying about lockdowns, and they were lying about masks. They were lying about the risk to children. They were lying about the risk to healthy people. There wasn't a thing they weren't lying about. And what still blows my mind is that the people who got it wrong in the independent media space, they still won't admit it. They still won't come around, and they wanna
No.
just memory hole it. It's so it makes me again, it makes me pessimistic on the future. It's like, well, if you can't get people in independent media to see through the biggest hoax of their life, which was COVID, which was the biggest crime against humanity ever, which was COVID, and, then how there really isn't any. And then when I did force the vote, which is a thing that we're all supposed to agree on, you couldn't even get the majority of them to agree on, and there's no price to pay for them when they don't go along with the thing that we're all supposed to agree on. So I'm sorry, I'm very pessimistic. I think things somehow are going to get worse in the United States. I think maybe when the dollar collapses because of all the sanctions and the way we're weaponizing the dollar, I think that's going to be the thing that really actually triggers a real revolution, when the dollar stops being the reserve currency of the world. And it's coming. It's going to come within 10 years, probably. The head of China, Xi, he just said that we should have the yuan as the reserve currency. We have BRICS now, right? So we
Right.
other economic centers. It's no longer a unipolar world. It's a multipolar world, and there's going to be other centers of power and economic power. And I think as soon as the reserve currency of the dollar goes away, things will get bad enough in the United States that people will finally get into the streets and shut things down. And that's the only way that's going to work, is if people get into the streets and shut things down. It's going to take a big moment, and it's going to take a big movement. And I think it's going to take something even more horrible than what we're living in. You must remember what we're living in. 70% of workers live paycheck to paycheck. 50% of workers earn $30,000 or less. Half the country can't afford a $500 emergency. That's what we're living in right now. And it's not bad enough to make people revolt. So I think what's going to have to happen is like what we did to Iran in December.
Hmm.
Scott Bessent just bragged about the fact that they put so many economic sanctions on Iran that they collapsed their economy and they devalued their currency. So everybody gets screwed in Iran. And that's what led people out into the streets. And so when that happens to us, which nobody else is going to do it to us, we're doing it to ourselves. We're making it toxic for the rest of the world to use the United States dollar as the reserve currency. So when it finally happens, when BRICS comes up with their own currency, or Africa comes up with their own currency, or there's a new reserve currency of the world, that's when people are going to really feel it. And I think that's what's going to make people finally get it. I hate to say it, but you're going to need something horrible like that to happen. And in the meantime, I urge people to not participate in the two-party system.
Well, Jimmy, you've been, not just a comedian, but you've been a journalist. And one of the things we want to point out to our listeners is that, we, Integrity Media, gave awards to journalists that we thought were doing extraordinary work in the last year. We gave our first award of the night to you. And the reason we did that was because you have put so many people, we talked about Dr. Robert Malone and Jay Bhattacharya and other people, even other people in independent media, you're very generous with your putting them on your show and introducing them to your very large audience, which, by the way, has been suppressed over the years by technology. We know that, but nonetheless, your word gets out, and you've been a real leader in getting the word out. You've got a huge following. I know you've done tours in Europe, and people are following in Europe. Because, by the way, the thing you said about the currency, the euro is in the same position or worse than the dollar. And look at all the censorship that they're rolling out in Europe right now to shut people down before they head out into the streets. So, but you're on the forefront of all that. And let's just, for the audience, if we can just show your acceptance speech at the
Oh,
Integrity
please
Review.
don't.
Yeah.
Please don't do that.
You don't have a choice. I think we're
Please
going to do it
don't.
anyway. If you have it, Chris.
He says no. Chris says no.
Oh,
Chris
thank
says
God.
no. Okay, well, we saved you the embarrassment.
It was a great speech, Jim.
It was a great speech.
It was you absolutely Pat said it better than me.
Yeah.
You really earned it, and it was well deserved. And
yes.
I appreciate the award. I appreciate all the kind words. I really do. It means a lot. I never expected myself to be getting a journalism award, but that's just how bad I think corporate journalism is, or mainstream news is, that someone like me could easily outdo them and bring something fresh to the space. So, I did learn something at that award ceremony, and it's of course a lesson I had learned earlier, but I forgot, which is never do comedy in a space that is not designed for stand-up comedy.
We were all laughing, but
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, Cy Hirsch said the same thing. Is that the best journalists are people that are, blue collar people, that working class people. That
yeah, and Matt Taibbi pointed that out as well. That journalists used to be, it used to be Mike Royko and
Jimmy Breslin, people
like that.
Circle,
who were working class people. They didn't go to Harvard. They were skeptical of things, and they got replaced by these Ivy League people who are just trying to, as you say, color in the lines. They've been compliant all their life, and they don't even know when they're being compliant. They just think they're doing what it takes to do a good job, and that's how it ends up. So it's people like you, Jimmy, that's keeping us all sane and keeping us informed. So we appreciate all your work, and we love your show. You can obviously see Jimmy at the Jimmy Dore Show on all the platforms, right, Jimmy?
Yes, correct, except for TikTok.
Okay.
I watch on Rumble.
Okay, fantastic. Yes,
right.
It's, for the time being, Rumble is a free speech platform, and so that's fantastic. And until it isn't, until Rumble becomes valuable enough for Google to buy it, which is what will happen. But until then, we have some place that actually has free speech.
Yeah. Well, don't forget to like and subscribe this show, and don't forget to watch Jimmy, because he's an invaluable resource for all.
And catch his comedy act when he comes to your town.
That's right.
As well.
Yes.
Yes. Like and subscribe. Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thanks.
We really enjoyed having you.
It's great to see you both. Thanks for having me.